Folks, just in from the Middle East, Iran has unleashed 420 of its most advanced Khorramshahr 4 ballistic missiles in a coordinated strike that has struck deep inside Israel. Reports from multiple sources confirm major damage in Tel Aviv, Haifa, and key air bases. Let me be very clear. This is not just another exchange. This is a calculated demonstration of strategic reach and precision that changes the immediate battlefield equation, one that unfolds in successive waves designed not merely to test defenses, but to overwhelm them through sheer volume and technological sophistication, revealing layers of Iranian planning that have been years in the making amid an ever-tightening ring of external pressures. Each of these Khorramshahr 4 missiles, carrying an estimated warhead payload of between 1,500 and 1,800 kilograms, possesses a range exceeding 2,000 kilometers, allowing it to arc across the region with a launch preparation time now reduced to approximately 12 minutes, thanks to its storable hypergolic propellant, a feature that grants Iran the kind of rapid response flexibility that alters the calculus of surprise and retaliation in ways previous systems simply could not achieve. This marks the first confirmed operational use of this specific variant at such an unprecedented scale since its unveiling back in 2023. And as someone who has spent decades watching these kinds of escalatory cycles from positions of considerable influence, I can already sense how this salvo stands qualitatively apart from anything we have witnessed in the recent back and forth. Not because of inflammatory rhetoric or unverified claims, but because of the hard, measurable indicators of impact on both civilian population centers and critical military infrastructure that are now filtering in through multiple independent channels. Having been inside the system, I can tell you that moments like these rarely arrive without a deeper backdrop of miscalculation and underestimation on all sides. Yet here we are, with the facts on the ground painting a picture of a strike that has forced even the most hardened skeptics to pause and reassess the immediate realities unfolding across the Levant. The barrage came in waves, each one layered with precision timing that maximized saturation effects. And while we await fuller confirmation on exact casualty figures and structural assessments, the initial reports leave no doubt that Israeli cities have absorbed blows that will reverberate far beyond the immediate tactical theater, compelling leaders in Tel Aviv and Washington alike to confront the uncomfortable truth that deterrence equations long assumed to favor one side have begun to tilt in ways that demand urgent recalibration. Stay with me, because this is not the time for simplistic narratives or knee-jerk reactions. What we are witnessing is the culmination of strategic patience exercised under immense duress, and it sets the stage for the kind of analysis that separates informed reflection from mere commentary. Let me shift now into the broader context that frames this extraordinary event, because to understand why Iran chose this moment and this scale requires situating the attack squarely within the escalating cycle of tensions that has defined the Iran-Israel-US dynamic throughout 2026, a year already marked by fragile ceasefires that dissolved under the weight of unresolved grievances and aggressive posturing from multiple capitals. Following the tenuous pauses in direct hostilities earlier in the year, recent Israeli and American strikes on Iranian proxy assets and even select targets within Iranian territory had signaled an intent to keep the pressure high, all while the Trump administration doubled down on its blockade and sanctions policies that aim to strangle Tehran's economic lifelines and constrain its military options. Yet Iran's strategic patience, cultivated through meticulous preparation and a doctrine of asymmetric resilience, has emerged as the dominant factor here, a patience born not from weakness, but from a calculated assessment that time and technical self-reliance would eventually allow it to seize the initiative, despite the relentless external squeeze. I have watched these games played from inside the Situation Room on more than one occasion, and assessments like these rarely survive first contact with reality, particularly when intelligence communities on the opposing side convince themselves that underground facilities, dispersed launchers, and hardened production lines can be neutralized through a handful of precision airstrikes or economic isolation. But if you think that's the full story, it's not. Stay with me. Prior operations under the banner of what Iran has termed its True Promise series, involving hundreds of missiles and drones in earlier exchanges, had already demonstrated a growing capacity for coordinated strikes. Yet this 420 missile barrage represents a qualitative leap, one that underscores how Israeli and U.S. intelligence evaluations appear to have significantly underestimated both the depth of Iran's missile inventory and its sustained launch capacity, even after months of targeted disruptions. Those underground missile production and storage facilities, many of which survived earlier rounds of Israeli airstrikes through a combination of geographic dispersion, engineering redundancy, and deliberate deception, have proven far more resilient than public briefings suggested, allowing Tehran to maintain a second strike capability that was never truly degraded. Contrast this with the Israeli claims of preemptive actions that were supposed to have reset the balance. Instead, they seem to have consolidated Iranian resolve, fostering a level of technical self-reliance that sanctions were explicitly designed to prevent. The Trump-era maximum pressure policy, with its emphasis on naval blockades in the Gulf and layered economic restrictions, has in many respects backfired by accelerating Iran's drive toward indigenous innovation in propellant systems, guidance packages, and warhead designs, turning what was intended as containment into a catalyst for precisely the kind of demonstrative power projection we see unfolding tonight. This barrage, therefore, is not merely reactive, but a deliberate assertion that Iran retains the ability to dictate the tempo of escalation, even when facing superior conventional forces arrayed against it, a reality that forces us to revisit long-held assumptions about regional power dynamics and the sustainability of deterrence through superior technology alone. What comes next is where things take a serious turn, and it is in the technical dimensions of this Khorramshahr 4 system, also designated as the Kheibar in some Iranian nomenclature, that the true weight of this event becomes apparent. Because the missile specifications reveal a level of engineering maturity that has quietly transformed Iran's deterrent posture from one of defiance to one of credible, scalable threat. Measuring approximately 13 meters in length and powered by a liquid-fueled engine utilizing storable hypergolic propellant, the Khorramshahr 4 boasts a maneuverable re-entry vehicle, or MaRV, capable of executing evasive maneuvers in the terminal phase of flight, which dramatically complicates interception efforts by forcing defensive systems to contend with unpredictable trajectories at speeds that can exceed Mach 8 to Mach 16, depending on the flight profile. This is not some rudimentary Scud derivative cobbled together under sanctions. It incorporates guidance upgrades that allow for far greater accuracy than earlier generations, potentially augmented by options for cluster munitions or submunitions that can further saturate target areas and degrade area defense networks. The saturation tactics employed here, with 420 missiles launched in carefully orchestrated waves, were designed explicitly to overwhelm Israel's vaunted layered air defense architecture comprising the Iron Dome for shorter-range threats, David's Sling for medium-range intercepts, and the Arrow system for exo-atmospheric engagements. And the math, as I have noted in previous briefings, is brutal when launch volumes exceed simultaneous intercept capacity by factors of 3 to 5 to 1. Having been inside the system, I can tell you that the economic asymmetry at play here only compounds the challenge. A single Arrow 3 interceptor carries a price tag in the range of $2 to $4 million, while each Khorramshahr 4 can be fielded for an estimated $1 to $2 million, creating a cost-exchange ratio that heavily favors the attacker and strains even the most well-funded defensive budgets over prolonged engagements. Production scale, sustained despite years of sanctions through parallel supply chains and domestic manufacturing breakthroughs, has enabled Iran to absorb attrition while retaining the ability to mount follow-on salvos. And documented data from this 2026 wave already indicates penetration rates that resulted in confirmed strikes on high-value targets, including Ben Gurion Airport, the 27th Air Base, and densely populated districts in central Tel Aviv. These hits were facilitated not only by the sheer volume, but by the missile's terminal phase maneuverability and possible decoy or electronic warfare countermeasures that further diluted the effectiveness of Israeli interceptors, turning what was billed as an impenetrable shield into a system operating well beyond its designed saturation thresholds. I have watched these games played from inside the Situation Room, and the implications extend beyond the tactical to the doctrinal. Israel's reliance on qualitative superiority in air defense has met its match in Iranian quantitative depth married to qualitative improvements, forcing a reevaluation of whether technological edges can indefinitely compensate for geographic vulnerabilities and the realities of sustained missile barrages. This next part changes everything, because as the smoke begins to clear from the impact zones, the operational and political fallout inside Israel is already generating pressures that will test the cohesion of its leadership and the resilience of its society in ways that previous exchanges, even the intense ones of 2024, never quite achieved at this magnitude. Reports emerging in real time speak of widespread power outages across central Israel, with critical infrastructure nodes disrupted in patterns that suggest not random hits, but targeted degradation of electrical grids and command nodes, alongside the closure of major airports that will ripple through the economy for days, if not weeks, to come. The estimated economic cost in the first 48 hours alone is projected to climb into the several billion dollars when factoring in direct damage, lost productivity, emergency response, and the psychological toll on a population already weary from prolonged conflict. All of which translates into mounting political pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu and his coalition to deliver a decisive response without triggering a wider conflagration that could engulf the entire region. On the U.S. side, the command and control dilemmas are equally acute. Forward bases scattered across Iraq, Syria, and the Gulf states now sit squarely within the threat envelope of similar range Iranian systems, compelling carrier groups to reposition farther from the theater, while offering no immediate counter to the kind of dispersed, mobile launch capabilities Iran has refined over the years. Iran's multi-axis strategy here is particularly noteworthy, blending the missile barrage with coordinated proxy activities along multiple fronts and calibrated diplomatic signaling that frames the strike as a measured retaliation rather than an all-out offensive, thereby preserving escalation dominance while messaging restraint to international audiences. But if you think that's the full story, it's not. Stay with me. Intelligence miscalculations by both Israeli and American agencies regarding the readiness and dispersal of Iran's missile forces have been laid bare once again, despite months of preparatory airstrikes aimed at degrading launch infrastructure. Evidence strongly suggests that underground facilities and mobile transporter erector launchers remained largely intact, protected by a combination of strategic depth, decoy networks, and rapid reconstitution protocols that have become hallmarks of Iranian operational art. This stands in stark contrast to earlier optimistic assessments that portrayed Iran's arsenal as brittle and vulnerable, and the long-term erosion of Israeli deterrence credibility across the region cannot be overstated, as allies and adversaries alike now witness a demonstration that even the most advanced defensive systems can be saturated when confronted with the right combination of volume, speed, and evasion. Historical parallels to the 2024 exchanges are instructive, but only up to a point. Those earlier salvos, while significant, operated at scales and with precision levels that this current operation has eclipsed, underscoring a trajectory of Iranian capability growth that no amount of sanctions or targeted strikes has managed to arrest. The political consequences within Israel are already manifesting in emergency cabinet sessions and public discourse that questions the sustainability of current strategies. While in Washington, the dilemmas extend to balancing alliance commitments with the imperative to avoid direct entanglement that could draw American forces into a protracted conflict with unpredictable global ramifications. Let me be very clear. This barrage demonstrates that Iran's credible conventional deterrence has now crossed a decisive threshold, one where it can impose unacceptable costs on Israel and its partners without ever needing to escalate into the nuclear domain. And that revelation carries profound implications for the entire architecture of regional security that has been painstakingly constructed over decades. The failure of the Trump administration's strategy to contain Iran through a combination of proxy pressures, naval interdictions, and economic warfare is now on full display, as Tehran has not only weathered the storm, but emerged with its missile inventory largely preserved, including hundreds of additional launchers and warheads held in reserve for precisely these kinds of contingency operations. Pre-war estimates pegged Iran's operational ballistic missile launcher inventory at around 420 across various types. And the sustained large-scale employment we have just witnessed validates those figures, while highlighting the depth of production lines that continue to function despite the most stringent sanctions regimes in modern history. Projected remaining inventory remains sufficient for multiple additional waves of 300 to 500 missiles each, granting Iran the ability to maintain offensive initiative over an extended period, and forcing a fundamental reassessment in both Washington and Tel Aviv about whether current policies of confrontation can be sustained without risking broader strategic overstretch. The math is brutal, and the strategic outlook just shifted decisively because leaked or inferred diplomatic cables from U.S. channels already indicate urgent internal calls for de-escalation pathways to avert a wider regional war that no one, not even the most hawkish voices, can confidently predict would end in decisive victory. Israeli government statements have begun to acknowledge serious damage, in contrast to earlier assertions of near total interception rates approaching 99%. A rhetorical pivot that itself signals the gravity of the moment and the recognition that deterrence credibility has been challenged in a manner requiring more than cosmetic adjustments. Having been inside the system, I can tell you the quiet panic this is causing in certain corridors where long-term planning assumptions about Iranian limitations are being quietly discarded in favor of more realistic appraisals that account for Tehran's strategic depth, its alliances with external powers like Russia, and its network of non-state actors capable of secondary pressure points. This is not the end of the story, but a pivotal inflection point, where the preserved missile inventory and demonstrated launch resilience compel policymakers to confront the limits of coercion when the target possesses both the means and the will to absorb punishment while retaining the capacity for calibrated retaliation. What comes next is where things take a serious turn. And as we look toward the strategic outlook unfolding from this point forward, it becomes evident that Iran has established a new baseline of dominance in the missile domain, one that allows it to absorb sustained external pressure while retaining the offensive initiative in ways that reshape the entire deterrence landscape across the Middle East. The narrowing window for U.S. or Israeli miscalculation is now painfully apparent, because any attempt at a limited counterstrike risks triggering further Iranian responses that could target additional high-value assets or extend the conflict through proxy channels in a manner that multiplies the costs exponentially. Near-term scenarios point toward either a carefully calibrated Israeli retaliation met with an equally measured Iranian follow-on that preserves escalation control, or a reluctant push toward U.S.-mediated ceasefire negotiations that acknowledge the new realities on the ground rather than wishing them away through further military escalation. Iran's vast territorial depth, its dispersed and hardened assets, and its deepening partnerships with like-minded actors provide a strategic buffer that few adversaries can match. And projected timelines for potential additional strikes suggest that any Israeli escalation would be met with responses timed to maximize political and economic leverage rather than mere destruction. I have watched these games played from inside the Situation Room, and this one is far from over. Yet the trajectory is now clear toward a regional balance in which Iran's conventional capabilities force a fundamental rethinking of deterrence calculations that once assumed technological superiority and alliance networks would suffice to maintain the status quo. Economic and political pressures are already building within the Trump administration to find off-ramps that avoid direct American confrontation, drawing on historical lessons from past conflicts where missile barrages of this magnitude have historically compelled political recalibration far more effectively than they have delivered outright military victory. The long-term shift is toward a new equilibrium where the ability to impose costs through precision-guided conventional systems, backed by resilient production and dispersal doctrines, grants Iran a seat at the table that can no longer be ignored or wished away through sanctions alone. If you want the unvarnished strategic truth as these events unfold, stay with me right here on Lawrence Wilkerson Updates. Hit that subscribe button, leave your thoughts in the comments below. What do you believe comes next? This is Lawrence Wilkerson signing off. Until the next update, stay informed, stay analytical.